What's going on, Hornets fans? This is Richie. Hope you guys are having a good one. Welcome to another Buzz Beat. We are live here on Twitter Spaces and YouTube. I will be joined by Spencer here. Please interact with us. If you have questions, put them in the comment section, or if you're on Twitter Spaces, you can chime in and request to speak. Spencer, how's it going? I heard you just got back from Newport, Rhode Island.
Yeah, I did. It's going well. So I got my master's degree a few months ago, and that was my wife's present to me. We like going to the Northeast in the winter. I know it sounds like a weird place to go in January, but we like going up there because yes, are some things closed, of course, but everything's more accessible. You still get the great seafood. We went and saw the breakers and the mansions in the Newport area. If people are not familiar with that in the South, I'm not surprised, but it is a really cool experience to go up there and see the mansions. And Richie, it sounds like you responded. You're like, oh yeah, my brother's getting married up there. I was like, wait, where's Richie hiding this treasure chest?
Yeah, like when you first initially said that, like I was like, why does this sound familiar? And I was like, oh yeah, my brother in August is going to get married there. So I've never been, but I've seen your pictures and I've seen pictures on the website for the venue that he's getting married at. So it definitely looks like a very lovely place, and sometimes it feels a little bit too ritzy for my taste.
Yeah. I mean, in the summer, it's one of those places like all in Northeast, I guess. Really, like the summertime is just like flip the world upside down, different, right? Than it is in the winter. I mean, the Cape, Martha's Vineyard, Block Island, Newport, where we were. I mean, they're all just a totally different place in the summer. But it was cool. Like it really wasn't that cold either. I think it got down to like mid 20s, overnight. But during the day, it was like right freezing. We saw a few flakes, but mostly just rain, sprinkles. So it was fun, man. I love seafood too. I love oysters, love all that stuff. So that's the place to go for that.
Very good. So yeah, I'm definitely excited to go in about 8-9 months from now and check that out. So as we get into this, we encourage you guys to check out BuzzBeat Plus by visiting buzzbeat.substack.com for early access, ad-free episodes, and exclusive content. So what we're going to do today is get to some listener questions. And the first one is from Ben. And his question, it has a comment as well, but the question says, can this team be competitive with Terry Rozier as the starting shooting guard for the next 3 seasons? He goes on to say, I think it's time to give Bryce McGowan some more experience and make a decision on book night. So, to answer this question, I would say potentially they could be competitive with him as the starting shooting guard, but I don't necessarily think it's going to be like next season. If it's towards his second year or third year, as he is rounding out his extension here, maybe. But I do think for this team to be competent and competitive, they do need to do some maneuvering with their roster. Like, this offseason or currently speaking in the season, midseason trades. And for that to happen, you already have Hayward taking up $30 million. You have Rozier, who's taking up what, $24-25 million a year. So it doesn't give them a lot of wiggle room. But if you were to trade Rozier, it does give you a little bit more wiggle room. And maybe in the offseason, you feel a little bit more comfortable bringing back Jalen McDaniels and PJ Washington, if that were the case. You'd also maybe feel a little bit more comfortable with the backcourt in terms of players that could complement LaMelo on both ends of the court. And it just sucks the way that Rozier's season has played out, because I think when you take a step back and evaluate Rozier's time here in Charlotte up to this point, like, you can't help but love his movement shooting. You can't help but love the fact that he has gravity all over the court. And he has had, little shades of improvement throughout the course of his time here with the Hornets, as a mid-range scorer, as an off-ball defender. But one thing that we've noted, Spencer, on this pod is how well does he actually pair with LaMelo, and more so on the defensive end versus the offensive end, because neither one of these players, LaMelo or Rozier, has proven to me that they could be a point of attack defender, someone that's going to guard that primary ball handler. I think Rozier by default has been that guy, but necessarily like the results necessarily haven't been that great. So when you construct a team and you want this team to be competitive, as Ben is talking about, it's really hard to do with the constraints of not only the salaries, but how those two pair on the defensive side of the court. So, I think handling the ball and making decisions would be a useful quality to have when you pair them next to LaMelo, and that could push LaMelo off ball at times too. So I'm just not sure Rozier is that type of decision maker. So Spencer, what are your thoughts on this in terms of the Hornets being competitive with Rozier still on the roster and probably just as importantly, still on the books?
Yeah, well, it's a great question, and it's something I've been thinking about a lot, as the trade deadline approaches. I would lead with this. If the Hornets were able to get off of Terry Rozier before the trade deadline or this summer, they effectively have zero long-term salary, all rookie scale contracts when LaMelo's extension comes up. Like, that's it. I mean, of course, like, they're going to sign some free agents this summer, and what happens with Jalen McDaniels, what happens with PJ Washington. But like, as the books sit today, if they were able to get off Rozier, there is nothing else when LaMelo's extension comes up other than rookie scale contracts, which is, I mean, the flexibility is endless, obviously. I think Rozier, the first thought that comes to my mind is like, let's just play a theoretical game and say the Hornets are able to draft second, get Scoot Henderson.
Mm-hmm.
I have no problem. Like, Rozier, is he overpaid? Yeah. Can he come off the bench if he's willing to accept this role, come off the bench and be a very viable contributor in the NBA in that 6-man role? And does he have enough playmaking chops? We know he has scoring. We know he can shoot from a lot of different areas of the floor. We know he's good off the dribble. We know he's good off the catch. But I have no problem with the Hornets keeping Rozier on contract throughout the life of his contract, if not into the last year, and then you sell him for whatever's left, and him coming off the bench. Like, that to me is the ideal role for Terry Rozier moving forward with Charlotte. Now, that's wish casting a lot of things to happen that are likely not to happen. As the roster is constructed, him next to LaMelo, no, I don't think that's a winning recipe. He's an undersized 2-guard, which is okay, with 6'7" LaMelo Ball, if LaMelo Ball was a choppy defender, right? Like, was actually able to switch and move Rozier over to the easier assignment from night to night. But, LaMelo Ball's not there defensively. He's getting better. We've seen some flashes, but those two together are just not a winning formula. So, it could go in a lot of directions with Rozier. I would be surprised if he was traded at the deadline. I think that there are some teams out there that would love his utility, but would not be able to bite down hard enough to take on the 3 years. Contenders just don't typically have a lot of financial flexibility to take on that kind of money over the long term. So that's really the stopgap with moving Rozier now or even in the offseason. But I do think if the Hornets, if they get the right break in the lottery and are able to draft the right player, I think this is a guy you can keep on your books if you're Charlotte and use him in different ways than we see him right now, right, in the starting 2-guard role. So is the number big? Yes, but Charlotte has so much financial flexibility moving forward that they can deal with it and still scratch out some utility and some use out of Terry Rozier moving forward, depending on what happens in the draft lottery, who they draft, all that stuff. So
it would feel weird though to have Rozier and potentially Hayward both be coming off the bench and they're both making what, 50 million combined. Like, that would be kind of odd to me.
Yeah, I mean, yes, of course, that it's like, it's a Picasso of a failed experiment, right? But at the same time, LaMelo's extension still a year away. everything else you have on the roster, again, is going to be rookie scale contracts. We'll see what happens in free agency. But yes, like if they're not able to move one of those two guys, you can kind of paint the picture of what they're going to do this summer. They're going to draft high, or they're going to have 2 first-round draft picks, but that's not going to eat up a large percentage of the cap. And then they're probably going to spend, 15 million below on free agents to manage the cap until they can move one of those guys, or Hayward falls off after next year. But yeah, like I think it's still possible with Rozier specifically. Hayward's a totally different deal, but I think it is still possible. We're having this conversation 2 years from now, and we're saying, wow, Terry Rozier coming off the bench for Charlotte is such a plus at age 30 or whatever that would be for him, 29. I think that's in the cards. Would I say it's likely? No, but I think it's definitely possible. Like he's not getting paid $35 million in 2 years, right? Like it's not one of those kind of deals. Absolutely sucks up, 30% of your cap.
Right.
So I know they'd love to sell him. Not sure they're going to be able to. At the same token, I think there's some utility left there, but a lot of dominoes need to fall between now and then.
Yeah, he and Hayward are going to be, I would think, very difficult to trade. And I do want to give Rozier a pass on this season, or at least maybe have some kind of built-in excuse with the way that he is playing. I think he does benefit from a player like Miles Bridges, who has that individual like rim pressure, getting to the rim, handling the ball, because we've seen too much of it this season where they've put the ball in Rozier's hands and it's just not gone the way that you would like it to. So just having players around Rozier that complement his play style, like you could have a little bit of a built-in pass for some of the issues that Rozier has had this season. Now, let's get to this like second comment that he had here about McGowan's and Book Night. And I totally agree with him in terms of, one, they do need to make a decision on Book, but it almost feels like they can't because the value is way too low to trade him. And then clearly he doesn't have the maturity, or he doesn't have the NBA ready level completeness right now to get out there on the court. They don't view him that way. So it's very hard to kind of showcase this guy. So it feels like they've made a decision on Book until he starts improving, until he starts putting it all together. You're just not really going to see him all that often. And to me, if he was in a trade, it would probably be more of like a sweetener and just like a filler, more so than like being centered around Book Night, obviously. And in terms of McGowan's, I think clearly he is a notch above Book Night in terms of the pecking order, in terms of what he's doing out on the basketball court. He still has, room to grow. He's young, but he has shown flashes of just playing to his strengths, especially when you compare it to Book. Book seems like he's out there trying to do too much at times. His confidence definitely isn't there, but McGowan's like, he makes quick decisions, pass, shoot, drive, filling the lanes, playing off ball. Like if he has an open shot, he takes it. So, to this question, if you do free up space for McGowan's by trading Rozier, it does make some sense. But to your point, Rozier can still be a useful veteran on this team in terms of the spacing. And yeah, I think McGowan's has plenty of room to improve. It's not one of those things where you have to play him right away. I think one of the biggest things that I've seen, not just recently, but just, in the course of his short career here, he does need to improve on the defensive side of the court in terms of his strength. He gets pushed around by bigger guys, and we saw that against Eric Gordon the other night in Houston. So do you have much hope for Book Night here, and kind of what the organization views him as? And McGowan's, what are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, not really with Book Night. Like it's the fact that he's just a MIA right now. Like
Right.
it's pretty fascinating, really, with where Charlotte's season is going and the fact that he can't get on the floor. It's pretty depressing, honestly. I don't know where it goes from here. I agree with you. Like if he's in, I kind of get the hunch that Charlotte would like to just move him, but you're right. He's just going to be like a throw-in as part of a bigger trade. So McGowan's, I mean, he's bigger. He's got some if you look back to his days in Nebraska, he's got a lot of reps on the ball. His potential is way higher than Book Knight's purely if you just take away all the extra stuff going on with Bouknight. Like, he's just bigger. He has on-ball potential, and we've seen his off-ball catch and shoot potential in Charlotte already. So, like, I think Charlotte should definitely invest in McGowens over Bouknight. But yeah, I don't know if either one of these guys like really play into the wing rotation, starting wing rotation conversation moving forward. I understand the question because like this is what we're working with right now. But my ideal situation is Charlotte does find a way to get off Bouknight and keeps McGowens on this roster, gets him into the rotation moving next year. We'll see what happens with who they bring in on the wing to start, or if that's just Rozier again. But yeah, I don't really have much hope left for Bouknight like this. And I should because I think a lot of Hornets fans look at this situation. They're like, oh, Malik Monk 2.0. I don't really see it that way because Malik Monk had a very clear skill set that was just kind of missing in action in Charlotte, right? He couldn't, the three ball wasn't falling, and now it is. I mean, you see him in Sacramento, and he can do more than that, but he had a very clear skill that translated to the NBA. I'm not really sure Bouknight has that. I mean, I think like the idea of him is that he could be this above average to like scratching an elite like ISO scorer off the bench, but I just don't see it. I just think the guy's a bust. And I think he's got everything else, and it seems like in his life is kind of working against him too. So,
yeah, that label is probably coming around the corner soon for him. And before we get to the next question, Spencer, I know we're kind of harping on Book a lot, but like if you were to choose one skill, like let's just say Bouknight is on the roster next season and seasons to come, like for him to get immediate play time, like if you had to point to one thing, a quick fix, I guess you can call it. Like, what's that one skill that can get him out on the court a little bit more often?
probably defense. I mean, when you think about where this franchise is and who's making those decisions, I mean, Book's got a phenomenal wingspan, right? He's athletic. Like, there's no excuse for him to not be an at par, an average defender at the 2 position. Like, there's really no excuse. I mean, that's what I think could get him on the floor more often. And the fact that this season is going the way it is and he's still not getting on the floor tells me one thing, that the coaching staff, primarily Steve Clifford, is just not satisfied with his work ethic away from games, So this is, again, there are some similarities in the Monk Bouknight situation. I think their immaturity probably comes into play a lot. And Clifford is love it or hate it. That's not part of this conversation. He is not going to give in that category, right? Like he demands something and he wants to see something. He wants it. And I don't think Bouknight's providing that. So I would say defense. Like, the shot is the shot. It's going to fall eventually. We've seen that with Monk. We see that with a lot of young players. They have to learn where the healthy diet comes from when it comes to shooting and seeing shots go down. Bouknight is no different than any other young player in this league in that sense. But if he's not going to care away from the game at practice, if he's not going to give the effort, if he's not going to give defensive effort for a coach that demands it, it's going to be really hard for him to get on court.
Yeah, that's what I debated too in terms of what's that one skill that would get him out on the court quicker. And defense, because Clifford is the coach, makes a ton of sense. But one thing that's always just stuck out with me is like the fact that he's just not a quick decision maker. Like, he has the ball in his hands and he just wants to over dribble. He's prone to hesitating on shots. And I'm sure confidence has a lot to do with that. And he's pressing and he just doesn't know what decision to make. But, that skill right there is kind of hard to simulate in practice in terms of, hey, you need to pass, kick, drive, shoot. We don't do all these different things in a quick manner because when you get out in the game, sometimes it just kind of changes. So,
and I think, and last thing, we can move on to the next, but I think that is just the thing with Bouknight. Like, a lot of players go through that stuff, right? Like, that's adjusting to the way you've played up to, the game of basketball up to this point in your life and adjusting to the speed of the NBA. Like, that stuff's teachable. Reps will fix that kind of thing, typically, not always. But the effort thing, like, that's foundational, right? Like, you got to bring that more than you don't. And something tells me he's He's not doing that right now.
Exactly. All right. Next question from Gary Alexander states, obviously the Hornets have been conservative regarding in-season trades in recent years. Do you guys believe there's a scenario where Mitch doesn't make any moves at the deadline? So Spencer, I'll let you lead off on this, but first thing I'll say, I mean, there's no secret that the Hornets need to be sellers. They need to be actively looking for trades, I would think. But do you think there's a scenario where no trades go down?
I mean, I would say the only way there's no trades that go down with Charlotte is if you assume that Kelly Oubre and Mason Plumlee just have not enough of a market, so they're buyouts. Like, to not sell one of those guys, certainly trade rather one of those guys, certainly, if not both, is like, I mean, that's like malpractice. And I don't think that, like, Mason Plumlee's been really good this year. I think there's a lot of teams in the league that he could help as a second big. Portland needs a big. I think the Clippers would be a good fit for him. I think that scenario has been brought up on this pod before. There's a lot of teams out there that could use his utility, his passing, his effort. I think he's been really, really good. He's miscast as a starting center, right? Kelly Oubre is more of an eye of the beholder. I think Miami's a really interesting fit for him. I think they need some help on the wing. We know he's a streaky shooter, but look, Kelly Oubre is like 6'7", 6'8", very athletic. Miami demands effort and defensive communication and these kind of things that I think he could help with. But Charlotte has not been able to get that out of him, and it didn't work out in Golden State either. So I just don't see how these guys don't have trade value. And I tweeted this actually this week. I think Charlotte needs to get out ahead of the market. Oubre is hurt right now, so that
Right.
makes it a little tricky. But it's pretty clear he's going to come back sooner rather than later. I would trade Plumlee like yesterday. Like, I think they should get out ahead of the market, figure it. Like, they don't need to bid against anybody. Like, who's interested? Do you have a second round pick? Boom, let's get it in. Like, get Mark Williams and Nick Richards more playing time now. We have 12 wins and it's mid-January. Like, come on, you need to sell Plumlee now. Anyways, we want to get to a question.
Yeah, I mean, those are the two. I mean, those are the two that I would say too, Plumlee and Oubre, in terms of being the targets. And even if it only gets you something small, because they are expiring contracts, because they don't really factor into the future. Even having a second round pick come back our way, if you don't feel like that's a great return for these guys, it doesn't really matter because they're not necessarily going to be on the roster next season. And you were talking about Rozier earlier, like that would be my personal ideal like player to trade just because of maybe the value that he has out there. And I do think he's valuable in terms of the on-court stuff, but I don't know how you could sell it to an opposing team other than just saying, hey, he's on our roster right now. We're not performing well. We've had all these issues go down in the offseason, and there's a reason why he's not performing the way that he is. If you are going to be a team that is contending for the playoffs, maybe his splits improve with you guys. Like that would be the sell.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the years left on his contract seem like that kind of negate his value to that point. So I do think it's tricky to trade Rozier. And then there's one player, you've mentioned it before, but PJ Washington, I'm not even sure what the future holds with him being a restricted free agent. I think what would be awful is if the Hornets didn't entertain trades for PJ, and then come the offseason, they either just go with the Jalen McDaniels route, or they just don't put up much of an offer for PJ in this offseason. So he's an interesting one. I go back and forth on whether or not I think the Hornets need to make him a priority. It's just odd because he is a skilled player. He does fit well with LaMelo. He does fit well with a roster that has some interchangeable parts. But right now, because he's playing on a roster that's, a bottom 3 team in the whole entire league, it's hard to see that value because he's not surrounded with the talent that you need. So thoughts on PJ Washington? Do you think the Hornets entertain anything? But again, his future is kind of up in the air this offseason too.
It's the most interesting decision before February the 9th that this franchise has to make, to be sure. It could go a lot of different ways. I think on one hand, the Hornets were thinking we're going to kind of call the bluff. Not the bluff, but like we're just not willing to pay what he wanted in the offseason, which I don't have it right in front of me, but I'm guessing it was somewhere in the $20 million range. Like we're not going there. The cap space landscape this summer is more significant than it has been in past years, and it only takes one team, only one, right, to give something above market value. And I do think that's coming for PJ. He's 6'8", he can shoot threes. He's versatile defensively. Like, enough said. He's going to have a robust market this summer. So I agree with you. I think Charlotte should be trying to trade him at the deadline. Like, that's just the place they are. He's a restricted free agent. He can go get an offer sheet, but the only way for Charlotte to get him back is to match that offer sheet. So they've almost pinned themselves into a corner where they're gonna pay above market value because they could not come to terms with him last year. I would be trying to trade him. I like PJ as a player. I'm not interested in paying that guy $20 million a year. And so I don't really blame Charlotte from that perspective, but I would have hoped that they could have found a way to make it work in negotiations. But yeah, I think there's a lot of teams that would love to have him at the deadline. I think Miami, again, I bring them up. I think they would be interested. I think Sacramento could use him. They're like scratching on third in the West right now. Like, that team could do anything, right? Like, they can talk themselves into anything. I think he would be a great fit there. Obviously, the Lakers. But the fact that he's a restricted free agent waters down his value, right? Like, I think he is high demand at the trade deadline, but he's a rental in theory.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Like and that comes into play in negotiations. From the outside, we assume if a team's trading for him, then they're going to re-sign him.
Yeah.
But in the negotiations with Mitch Kupchak and other GM, that's not what the other GM's going to say. He's like, no, this is we want this guy to help us win this year. That's as far as we're looking. We're not looking any farther than that, whether that is the truth or not. So that it just muddies the water, right? So my guess would be that PJ Washington is not traded before the deadline because of that reason.
I don't think so.
And Charlotte just kind of holds their breath and prays that a big offer sheet doesn't come, but I think it's coming.
Yeah, I'm more with you. I think definitely Lee wrote about it, and I know that Brian probably feels the same way, but I think both of them probably don't think that the Hornets should even entertain trades for Washington. And I feel like I've held back on this topic, but I do kind of side with you a little bit more just because of the fact that an offer sheet could come this offseason, and it puts the Hornets in a position to where they've got to make a decision. And when it's all said and done, not that Jalen McDaniels is the same type of player as PJ, but there are some similarities between the two. And if you're trying to kind of cut corners and save some money, I think Jalen McDaniels gives you more bang for your buck, because I don't think there's a world that both of those players come back. I can't imagine that that'd be the case. But yeah, to this question, like, is there a chance that they don't make a move this offseason, Spencer, or not this offseason, the midseason trade deadline? I would say there's a slim chance. I guess it could happen. And maybe with the team, with all their injuries and the revolving door, they could be bad enough anyway to kind of bottom out to that bottom 3, bottom 4, bottom 5 position of the NBA. So they should do everything in their power to make a move as a seller. And yeah, we'll see where it goes from there. So last question here, Spencer, and I don't have much thoughts on this because anyone that's listened to this podcast knows that I am the least tuned in to college basketball. At Air_Hicks. If the Hornets get a draft pick from 3 to 7 range, who would be the best fit for them? So yeah, having a season like this where Wembanyama or Scoot falls out of their hands and they're drafting 3, 4, 5, 6, somewhere around that range. Do you have a guy in mind, a guy or two that you've been watching a little bit? I know you're trying to pick up college basketball viewing coming up soon. So we got to get into it. I know that's going to be a point of topic of discussion here, but any thoughts on any players outside of Scoot and Victor?
Yeah, I mean, this this draft is very, very wing heavy. It is wing rich and a lot of talented guys in that area. I mean, I think that obviously if the Hornets fell in that 3 to 7 range, it'd be super disappointing.
Right.
But I still think they come away with a really, really good prospect. Like, if you're with us live today, Brandon Miller, I know Bama plays today. I think they're at Missouri. He would be, I think, I mean, I love what that guy does. He's 6'9", 200 pounds, plenty of room in his frame to put on weight. He's a lights out shooter. On the ball, still need to see a little bit more, but the Thompson twins, I mean, both of them are about 6'7". One, I can't remember. Like, this is where I need to dig in a little deeper on my draft prospect watching. One of them's much better on the ball, like a true point guard. The other one's a better shooter. I think Amon is the one that's better on the ball, and Osser is the one that's a better shooter. But either way, I think both would be a great fit next to LaMelo. In theory, Keontae George at Baylor, I got to see him earlier this year when Virginia played Baylor out in Vegas. He's a little smaller, about 6'4", 6'5", I think, but a really good defensive player. Just a crafty wing that can score in a lot of different ways. A physical player, although a little undersized. I like George. Cam Whitmore at Villanova. I haven't seen much of him, but I know there's a lot of buzz. And then the last two names I would say, Grady Dick at Kansas. I'm sure everybody's at least seen his face. Kind of an internet a college basketball sensation, if you will, this year. 6'7", 200, can shoot the lights out. Great moving off the ball. Better at the rim, better off the bounce than you would think. So he's intriguing. Then Cason Wallace, I don't know if I think it's Cason is how you pronounce it. Cason Wallace at Kentucky. They're actually about to play at 2:00 in a must-win game for them, I think, in terms of tournament hopes. 6'4", 185, similar to Keontae George in terms of size, but plays way differently, like a springy, really, really tenacious defensive kind of wing. So I know I just rattled off a lot of names, but like, I think if it was worst case scenario for Charlotte, they desperately need a wing player that can be a two-way utility kind of guy. And I hope I just laid out the case. Like, there's a lot of those guys in this draft in the top 10. So it would be bad if they didn't get a top 2 pick, but I still think they're coming away with a pretty dang good player.
Yeah, I need to brush up on my college prospect, but I don't ever get to that until like March or April. So don't count on me for that type of stuff. And some of the names I've obviously recognized and the ones that you've rattled off, maybe Brandon Miller is the one that's kind of been gaining momentum the most recently. We do have a question. We are recording this before the game against the Hawks on Saturday night. And Andrew in the comments section of YouTube asked, do you think LaMelo will be fit to play tonight? And I personally don't think so. I mean, I just don't think how you can come back from all these ankle injuries and just, it's just one thing after the other with this team and with LaMelo. And if you saw the injury, PJ Washington landed on LaMelo's ankle. I think even if he was somewhat available for tonight's game, I still think that you got to be cautious and not play him. And it kind of feeds into the scenario of just kind of trying to bottom out as well. So I don't know. I mean, we don't have any information here, Spencer, but to be honest, like, you're going to play it cautious, not play LaMelo tonight. So, but Andrew, we do appreciate the question and the interaction here in YouTube. So Spencer, any final thoughts as we kind of wrap up here with our live podcast on YouTube?
No, I don't think the LaMelo wrist stuff is concerning to me. The team
wrist
came
too,
out
yeah,
today
wrist. Yeah.
And said, correction, it was the right wrist that was actually injured in Houston the other night. And that, correct me if I'm wrong, that was the one he had to have surgery on, right? It was a shooting hand. I don't know. Anyways, we're allowed to get stuff wrong. But anyways, the wrist thing, assuming it is the same wrist, that's concerning to me. Anyways, not to end on a bad note, but yeah, that is a little concerning. I mean, the one that he had surgically repaired, and here we are pretty far removed from that, and he's having some soreness. But you also don't know, right, Richie? Because like, this team, I think, is leaning into losing. So you don't know if they're just like kind of putting that tag on him without it being an actual serious thing, or if like he's experiencing wrist soreness that is related or associated with that past injury and surgery. So something to monitor for sure.
All right. We appreciate everyone joining on Twitter Spaces. We appreciate everyone joining here on YouTube. We're going to wrap this up. If you appreciate our content, enjoy our content, be sure to leave us a rating and review wherever you listen to our podcast.